Welcome to the CEC Report. It's the 27th of February. I'm Robert Bowie and I'm with CEC leader Craig Isherwood. Welcome, Craig.
Yeah, thanks, Robbie.
In this week's CEC Report, British and Obama get their neo-Nazi coup in Ukraine. Ukraine's Jews look to flee. More warnings that Australia's property bubble is headed for a crash. And finally, the sinister fine print of farm assistance. Who decides who is viable? So first, the British and Obama get their neo-Nazi coup in Ukraine. Ukraine's Jews look to flee. So Craig, this situation in Ukraine has spiralled rapidly, right? Is even shocking to us, and we've been paying attention to it very closely.
You wouldn't know from the media down here, Robbie. Everything is just this is just an uprising to get rid of a tyrant. We've heard that before, haven't we?
We have heard that before.
Saddam Hussein, Libya, and so forth.
And supposedly Assad in
Syria.
Recently, yeah. Anyone that gets targeted for a regime change is a tyrant, etc. We know Yushchenko, the president there, Craig, has to be a tyrant. He has to be evil. Has to be the most bloodthirsty person in the world because he lives at a palace.
Yes.
And when I heard that on the news, and I hope people know what I'm talking about, it was all over the news on the weekend. His palace, the Ukrainian people were touring his palace. I thought, here we go again, because that was also the ID format reporting of Saddam Hussein. Had palaces and
statues torn down.
Yeah, that's right. Libya, Gaddafi's palaces, Mugabe's palaces. And then I thought, well, let's look at this palace, and we will put it up on the screen. It's half wooden, right? It looks like a ski chalet to me. Mm-hmm. And then I thought, well, there is one head of state who unarguably does live in a palace. In fact, many palaces, entirely paid for by the people, not by that head of state. And no one ever questions her because, of course, she's ours. Lovely lady, right? Just be careful the way you get the media spins you lines to lead you along a path here. And that's not to defend Yanukovych, Craig.
No. He was the president of the oligarchs, the very wealthy in Ukraine, right, Robbie? We'll say more about that.
But not to condemn him too much, because the good thing you could say about him was this: he was democratically elected, and nobody denies that, right? So yes, he was a big business party guy, etc., but he was democratically elected. So even though we oppose strongly the current government and the previous government, we're not advocating in Australia that people take up arms and topple them. Yeah, let's topple them through the ballot box, right? But so we've had a coup, is what's happened in Ukraine. Now, if you want proof that this is not a popular uprising, as the media has painted it, but it was entirely directed from the outside, have a listen. We're going to play some footage now. Listen to this leaked phone conversation between the State Department's representative in Europe, Victoria Nuland, the US State Department, and the US ambassador to Ukraine. And what you'll hear is these two characters discussing planning the next government of Ukraine. They're planning it, right? And she's going to refer to three people. Those three people are the Troika, the three opposition leaders who led the rallies. Now, one of those three, we'll put a picture up of him as well, is Ollie Tonyabuk. Now, this character is the head of the Svoboda Party. The Simon Wiesenthal Centre, which is the Jewish organisation that tracks neo-Nazis since World War II. They ranked this guy number 5 on their list of top 10 global anti-Semites, right? Because he's the guy who rails against Muscovites and Jews. He's a full-blown Nazi, this character. You'll see, we'll put up pictures of this Victoria Nuland with him, John McCain sharing a stage with him. You can see that. But listen to Victoria Nuland and the US ambassador to Ukraine discussing planning the next government of Ukraine.
I think we're in play. The Klitschko piece is obviously the complicated electron here, especially the announcement of him as deputy prime minister. And you've seen some of my notes on the troubles in the marriage right now, so we're trying to get a read really fast on where he is on this stuff. But I think your argument to him, which you'll need to make, I think that's the next phone call we want to set up, is exactly the one you made to Yachts. And I'm glad you sort of put him on the spot on where he fits in this scenario. And I'm very glad he said what he said in response.
Good. So I don't think Cleach should go into the government. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's a good idea. I think Yats is the guy who's got the economic experience, the governing experience. He's the guy, what he needs is Cleach and Tony Book on the outside. He needs to be talking to them 4 times a week. I just think Cleach going in, he's going to be at that level working for Yatsenyuk. It's just not going to work.
I think you reaching out directly to him helps with the personality management among the three, and it gives you also a chance to move fast on all this stuff and put us behind it before they all sit down and he explains why he doesn't like it.
I can't remember if I told you this or if I only told Washington this, that when I talked to Jeff Feltman this morning, he had a new name for the UN guy, Robert Seri. Did I write you that this morning?
Yeah, okay. I saw that.
He's now gotten both Seri and Ban Ki-moon to agree that Seri could come in Monday or Tuesday.
Okay.
So that would be great, I think, to help glue this thing and have the UN help glue it. And, fuck the EU.
All right, so Craig, that was from a few weeks ago, what we just heard, right? And of course, that is now what's playing out now. This is not popular uprising at all. But they had to use these characters because they had to create this violent situation, right, that could quickly unravel. And I have to say that the media coverage in general of this has been sickening.
Oh, beyond sickening, Robbie. This is classic Go Bells, the big lie idea. That it's so... They've portrayed the absolute injustice against the police there of trying to quell these neo-Nazis that have come out armed to literally kill has been painted as pacifists, which is a complete lie. I
think 2 years ago we had a Occupy Melbourne thing here in Melbourne, and the police came in the first thing in the morning and cleared it out. If those protesters then had thrown Molotov cocktails at the police, started burning them, started shooting them, how would the Victoria Police have reacted to that? Right?
Well, it would have been similar to what was happening over there. Yeah.
But that's why they had to use these neo-Nazi elements, because they had to create a situation that could be that you couldn't easily distinguish what's going on. But you can see pictures where you got the Nazi paraphernalia, etc. But we're going to focus on one particular aspect of it, because more than anything else, this proves what we're saying about the neo-Nazi element. And when I say this proves it, why does it have to prove it? Well, there is now a concession by the West that, there are some neo-Nazi elements, but they're a fringe. Now, we've got contacts in Ukraine who report, well, they're not exactly a fringe, because yes, they're a minority, but for example, of the 20,000 people in Independence Square, 2,000 of them were these hardcore neo-Nazis.
350 had been shipped out of Syria.
Yeah.
Finding the Syrian government there into Ukraine.
Come back, yep.
Specifically after Yanukovych had, in January, after Yanukovych had reneged on this deal with the European Associations Agreement. And
it's estimated there's 25,000 armed neo-Nazi bandits across the whole country, right?
That's because the breakdown of law and order has led to the fact that a lot of weapons depots have been now raided, so those weapons are out in the community. Now,
in the new government like interim government that's taken shape since the weekend, the new Internal Affairs Minister made an announcement that, to my mind, is quite chilling. He announced that the worst of these neo-Nazi groups, which call themselves Right Sector, and they sort of regard themselves as a street army for this Svoboda party, they will be incorporated into the Internal Affairs Ministry. Well, the Internal Affairs Ministry, they enforce domestic laws, right? They're the people who are going to be on the streets deciding which laws get enforced or not. This neo-Nazi group is now part of it. So what's happened? Well, in the last few days, the Jewish community in Ukraine have expressed some real panic. There's at least 2 Ukrainian rabbis have warned members of the Jewish community in Ukraine, there's 200,000 strong, to even consider leaving the country. Now, one of them is Rabbi Moshe Reuven Azman. He said to the Israeli newspaper Ma'ariv, he said, "I told my congregation to leave the city centre or the city altogether, and if possible the country too. I don't want to tempt fate," he added, "but there are constant warnings concerning intentions to attack Jewish institutions." And we already know that these neo-Nazi groups have been going around writing on the walls, "Jews live here," which is exactly what the Nazis did in World War II, right, and in Nazi Germany, etc. So no wonder they're in a state of panic. Israel knows this. The Jewish agency in Israel has reached out to the Ukrainian community saying, we will help you leave, and the Jewish community, the Jewish press in Israel saying, welcome, you're welcome to come here, because of course, there's nothing more serious in the minds of Jewish people than any kind of echoes of the Holocaust and the pogroms of Eastern Europe. But and if that's not proof, what is, right? These are the people. This is a situation that's come out of the strategy that the reason we're harping on about this, Craig, is these are our allies. The British and the Americans that have orchestrated this are our allies. We are implicitly involved through that. And as we said, they're going to World War II. They're risking World War III. But I wanted you to comment on this because you were sort of in on this on the ground floor. You attended a conference in March last year in Germany where Ukrainian people were present, and they warned then about this neo-Nazi uprising.
Yeah, Robbie, I think for lack of time on this particular segment, I want to refer people to an address that was given by Natalia Vitrenko. She's the president of the progressive leader, Dr. Natalia Vitrenko. She's the leader of the Progressive Socialist Party of Ukraine, and she's just completed a European tour, where here you have someone who's a member or former member of the Supreme Rada, the Parliament, addressing leaders and dignitaries in France as part of this tour. Now, what she lays out for people is the insiders on the ground reports of the truth of what's happening in Ukraine. So this is an absolute must. People should get this document. It's a transcript from Russian into English, and read this, and it'll give you the background and the facts of what we're trying to address in this particular segment. But look, the fact is that both Yushchenko and Yanukovych, both these presidents, did nothing to stem the development of these neo-Nazi groups in Ukraine. And Dr. Natalia Vitrenko herself sued Yanukovych to try and get the Nazi-type decrees that were brought in prior to both these presidents and during these presidents' terms reversed.
Yeah.
Now, they didn't do that. So this was a known, supported operation by the West. The West was funding these neo-Nazi groups. You had something like 2,200 different groups being funded by the West. And then all of a sudden this provocation came whereby, you see this violence erupt in the streets in order to be able to get rid of an elected, democratic elected government. What was the trigger point? Was the fact that Yanukovych reneged on the European Union Association Agreement, which meant that the West wasn't able to come in to the Ukraine and loot it blind under the free trade policies that are destroying our country. Instead, the majority of the Russian population there orientated towards what was called towards Belarus, towards Russia,
The customs union.
a customs union, and that's actually got far more support than anything to do with the EU. So there's a lot of material here, Robbie, but people really need to get onto the internet, get this material and read it for themselves. It's really quite stunning, and it just proves just how we are being fed the Goebbels' big lie about what's happening in Ukraine again.
And if you haven't yet read our New Citizen on it, you can call in and order that or get it off the website. And Craig, we will be hitting Canberra with it this week in a mass saturation way, and we'll be putting out a press release today that people can read on our website about this Jewish fear in Ukraine, which is very real, it's very serious, and the world needs to take notice of it. All right, we've run out of time. When we come back, we're going to talk about the economic crisis facing Australia. Welcome back to the CEC Report. More warnings that Australia's property bubble is headed for a crash. Australia's banks, Craig, better take stock, because when we talk about an impending crash of the property bubble, I know there's plenty of viewers who would get nervous by that, because of course, everyone is sort of a victim of this thing, and if you're locked into it, you don't want to hear that it's going to come down necessarily. But if you're worried, you should understand the banks are a lot more worried, because this bubble is the whole substance of their assets.
If you add together their equity, Robbie, which is the shareholding value, plus the value of their assets, which they are basically mortgages, where our banks are exposed to something like 80% of the mortgage market's just tied up in them Right, you add those two together and then you take away the liabilities, the overseas loans and everything else, what you find is that with a mere 4% correction of the assets, which is these mortgages, the banks are bankrupt.
Yep. So an American economist named Harry Dent has visited, and he's predicting that it's going to be a 30% correction, quote unquote, this year. Now here's his reasoning, Craig. He said, A, all countries who have property bubbles say that theirs is different from everybody else's, so that's why it won't crash. And so everyone he's met in Australia apparently has told him why ours is different. But having the international experience he has, he's heard it all before. And the normal arguments don't really apply. That people, he just ridicules the idea that it's all based on demographics and the fact that there's not much land around the cities anymore where people want to live, blah, 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 and that's why prices are going up. Because he said there's umpteen examples of that all around the world, and that never held water in those cases. Because, of course, this is one of the last great property bubbles. His bigger point is this: Australia is dependent upon China. And China actually has its own property bubble, which he said dwarfs Australia's, is much bigger. It can't last in China. And he said the minute it comes down in China, it's coming down here. The difference is China's property bubble, as big as it is not the same size proportionally to the economy as Australia's is.
No.
So coming down here, this is the end of the Australian financial system, right? And that's the thing, that people have to understand. It's a bigger crisis for the banks than for the people.
He quotes the figures, Robbie, that China's property bubble is measured in terms of 30 times the median income. In Australia, we're looking at 8 to 10 times the median income to be able to buy a house, when the normal affordable housing should be around about three times the median income. There are no affordable areas anywhere in Australia today based upon that idea, of that historical idea.
Yep.
And what's really concerning is that, look, you start to look at, for example, the amount of jobs that we're losing in manufacturing sector, the shutdown of
full-time, well-paid jobs.
Right? And you look at the question of a commodities correction with China, which is very much on the cards, and therefore you can see very easily, looking into the future, how a crash, I should say, I'm getting brainwashed by the lingo now, a crash of 30% more is very, very possible, if not inevitable.
Yep. And when it happens, the people have got to understand, as scary as it sounds, there is a solution, right? Yeah. I mean, we have the solution. There's no free market solution to this, right? But a government that's committed to the common good, Craig, could actually, with policies such as Glass-Steagall, that if you implement that firewall, make sure that whatever happens to the banks doesn't take away people's savings, right? And then you need to do a restructuring of the debt that people have, which will be so much greater than the value of their properties. You can't have that kind of system, and the debt has to be restructured down. And the only people that will hurt is the banks, but that's what the government can put them into some kind of protection arrangement while that happens. And so the financial system that comes out through the other side will be in a much better position when it happens, and for the Australian people, housing will again be affordable.
Yeah, Robbie, we've got the Glass-Steagall magazine available now. That's what people have to familiarise themselves with. Without a Glass-Steagall legislation in this country, the separation of the commercial banking system, the protection of the citizen, and then the quarantining of the investment and merchant banking sides of our economy, which is just completely and utterly imbibing on derivatives, on debt,
all based on
speculation, property speculation. This has to be quarantined and separated. It can be done. It's a political choice. It's not a question of economics. It's purely a political program.
Yep. All right. Well, thanks for that, Craig. When we come back, we're going to talk about the farm crisis. Welcome back to the CEC Report. Finally, the sinister fine print of farm assistance. Who decides who is viable? So I suggest that people, Craig, forget the debate that's raging at the moment over why does Tony Abbott assist the farmers but not the car workers, right? And the reason I suggest they forget that is because this is not, what he's announced is not really assistance for the farmers. They've announced something like $300 million in low interest loans, right? But it won't touch the sides of the crisis, which is a $70 billion debt crisis on family farmers in Australia. And we can show, there's a graph we'll put up on the screen there that shows from a study a little while ago, the difference between 1969 and where it was heading in 2011, and of course it's worse now, where farm output has gone from $1 billion to $12 billion in that time, but farm debt has gone from $1 billion to $70 billion in that time, right? Now, here's the thing though. When Mr. Abbott made this announcement, there was fine print even in his announcement, which is that this will go to viable farmers. What does that mean? You know, to me, Craig, there's two definitions of a viable farmer. The right definition is a farmer who can, if the season's right, grow food off that land. But that's not their definition, is it?
No, Robbie, look, I want to come back to, I just done some meetings in Western Australia, which has a large farming population, right? And I was meeting with members of Parliament over there, and one member of Parliament recounted the story about his father. He said his father knew a fair bit about farming, and he said when you've got a paddock full of sheep, right, and you have a fly strike,
yep,
you can expect that 10% of those sheep are going to be fly struck. What do? Are those sheep unviable? No, you drench them, you deal with the maggots on the back of their bums, right, and they become healthy sheep again and profitable.
Yep.
Well, that's the problem over in Western Australia, saying 10% of farmers are unviable. Why are they unviable? It's because they've got the bankers on their ass.
That's
right. Get the bankers off their ass.
Hang on. Is this? Will we get sued if bankers are intelligent enough to interpret that you've compared them to blowflies?
Let me be specific. When they talk about farmers being at risk or unviable, right, you have a bad season. When the farmer goes to borrow more money, the interest rates go up to that farmer.
Yep.
They have another bad season, the interest rates go up. So instead of being small interest rate loans, they go up to 17.5%.
Yep.
This is a result of the risk assessments of the bankers, the private banking system, and that's what they say makes farmers unviable. Well, let's forget about the idea of a state bank for the minute. Let's talk about a national bank. Let's talk about the idea of having a Commonwealth National Credit Bank that will issue low credit for 4% or less over 25 years, 15 years, whatever those farmers need. You've now dropped the interest rates by 13.5%. You've given them long-term finance in order to weather the storms and the droughts that are going to come. You've made them viable on the basis that there's an enthusiasm for them to be productive. Right? We've drenched the bankers off the back of the sheep. Got rid of them. Therefore, you know, not just 10% of farmers have become viable, but many, many more. And we can see an increase in production. So, I mean, that's the image that people have to see. If you've ever seen a maggot-blown sheep, that's the image you should have of what the banking system is doing to our entire economy, not just the farmers.
No, exactly. And Craig, I wanted to highlight for the viewers, and they can call, we're going to publish this next week actually, but they can call in and get a copy of it. I attended a conference last year in San Francisco addressed by a farm leader in the United States named Frank Endress, and his speech was called Keeping the Farmer on the Land. And he tells a story in there about when America had parity pricing from 1941 to 1952. And the reason for it was twofold. One was to keep farmers producing in the war. The second one, though, the farmer Carl Wilkin, who was the farm leader who convinced the government to go with it, he said, look, agriculture has the highest multiple of wealth creation, 7 to 1. Every dollar in agriculture becomes $7 for real economy. America needs to be wealthy enough to produce for the war. That's why we need parity pricing. And it worked a charm. And
the models are there, Robbie. This is not rocket science. This has been done before. We've got a parasitical financial and monetary system that we've got to get rid of.
We're out of time, thanks. Call in next week for more.